What if Robb Stark married Margaery Tyrell? What if a single death could unmake a house? What if the loss of one man at dawn, cut down by shadow and sorcery beneath the walls of Storm's End, could leave the richest family in the Seven Kingdoms suddenly and terrifyingly alone? Renly Baratheon is dead. Overnight, House Tyrell loses the king it gambled everything on. Margaery is no longer a future queen. Mace Tyrell has backed the wrong claimant. The greatest army in Westeros suddenly has no future, no alliance, and no obvious path forward. Every road before them leads to another man's throne, except one that almost no one in Westeros would dare consider. Olenna Tyrell does not grovel. She has never groveled, not for anyone, and she does not intend to begin now for a man who murdered his own brother with a woman's magic. In the solar at Bitterbridge, with the afternoon light falling soft across the rushes, she sits across from her son and studies him the way a farmer studies a field gone to rot, wondering how much can yet be salvaged. She lets him talk. She lets him exhaust himself. Then she speaks, quietly, and the quiet is what makes him listen. "Consider the board," she tells him, "not as he wishes it to be, but as it is. In the West, the young wolf, a boy of 15 who has not lost a single battle, who took Jaime Lannister at the Whispering Wood and shattered a Lannister host in the Riverlands, who carries the North and the Riverlands behind him like a tide. The Lannisters are reeling. Tywin sits at Harrenhal, wrong-footed, waiting. And this wolf, this untried northern boy with a crown of bronze and iron already upon his brow, has one glaring want. He has no south. He has swords, and he has victories, but he has no bread to feed a long war, no coin to pay for it, no ships to command the narrow sea. He has everything a king needs to win a battle, and nothing a king needs to win a kingdom. The Reach has all of it. Marry Margaery Tyrell to Robb Stark, and suddenly the wolf has everything he lacks." Olenna does not finish the thought aloud. She does not need to. Robb listens. There is a girl at the crag named Jeyne Westerling whose kindness has begun to feel like something more. Catelyn sees it before he does. She knows battles alone cannot win kingdoms, and she has already begun weighing the price owed to House Frey for the crossing. Robb's heart is pulling one way. His kingdom is pulling another way. But the Tyrell rider comes first. He arrives at dusk, cloaked and unremarkable, and he is brought to the king in his solar, with the fire low and the shutters closed against the river damp. He speaks of Renly's death, of Highgarden's grievance against Stannis, of a maiden of surpassing beauty and a house of surpassing wealth, left suddenly without a match. He speaks the way Olenna taught him to speak, saying much by saying little. Robb hears the offer beneath the words. He thinks of Jeyne. He thinks of the phrase and the crossing, and the promise he has not yet made. He thinks of his mother's warning, and of granaries and galleys and men beyond counting. Then he sets his heart aside, and he tells the rider to carry a message south. In another history, Robb Stark's next marriage doomed his kingdom. In this one, it would remake all of Westeros. What if a message could reshape a war? What if a single rider, dispatched south under a low fire, carried the weight of galleys and granaries and the fates of 10,000 men? The message travels, and in its wake comes a procession no scout mistakes for anything but what it is. They come under guarded escort, the roses of Highgarden, along the wet roads that skirt the crossing at the Twins. not to the twins themselves, for neither party trusts Walder Frey's hospitality, and both remember what such hospitality has cost lesser guests. They meet instead on neutral ground, a river meadow with tents raised at careful distances, each host arranged so that no man might feel cornered. Mace Tyrell arrives with his banners and his belly, and his booming welcome, and behind him, silent and watchful, rides his mother. Olenna Redwine misses nothing. She notes the placement of the northern riders, the readiness of their horses, the way Robb Stark's guard positions itself between the king and the tree line. She approves. A boy who guards his flanks in a friendly camp is a boy who has learned that no camp is friendly. The negotiation opens as all such negotiations open. With the debt no one has named aloud, the phrase, the crossing, the betrothal that Robb Stark once swore to pay in a Stark's hand, and has not yet paid. The Tyrells know of it. Of course they know. Olenna has made it her business to know, and she lays it upon the table, not as an accusation, but as a problem to be solved between allies. She will not have her granddaughter wed to a king already promised elsewhere. The debt must be discharged, and it must be discharged in another's coin. Robb understands. He does not flinch, though the cost is his to bear. He offers his uncle, Edmure Tully, Lord of Riverrun, freshly a lord, and freshly of value. Edmure will take a Frey bride, and the North will sweeten the crossing with land and titles enough to bind Lord Walder's pride. It is a graceless bargain, the kind that buys a bridge with a man who never asked to be sold, but it keeps the crossing. It keeps the Freys from turning their coats, and it frees the king to marry where marrying matters most. Olenna listens, and she nods, and she says nothing that is not necessary. The old woman has spent a lifetime measuring men by what they are willing to spend, and she is measuring now. Then there is Margaery. She comes to him alone, or near enough, in the gray hour before the pact is spoken. She does not open with flattery. She opens with a question about his men, about how far the North's grain will stretch through a winter's campaign, about what a soldier eats when the marching season ends. Robb answers, guarded, and she answers his answer with numbers of her own. The yield of the reach, the tonnage the Redwine fleet can carry, the mouths that Highgarden can feed. She frames the marriage not as a bond of hearts, but as a merging of ledgers. His swords, her stores, his winter-hardened men, and her endless summer fields. A partnership, she calls it, and she watches to see whether the word offends him. It does not. He is struck, not by her beauty, though she is beautiful, but by the cold, clean architecture of her mind. She has thought further ahead than he has. She has thought about the peace that must follow the war, about who governs whom when the killing stops, about the shape of a realm ruled by a wolf and a rose together. She tests him with ambition, and he does not shrink from it. She tests him with candor, and he answers in kind. When she leaves him, she carries a verdict to her grandmother, and the verdict is favorable. He will do. More than that, he will serve. While roses and wolves take one another's measure, Catelyn Stark holds the hardest ground alone. The Tyrells want assurances, and among them, delicately, comes the question of the Kingslayer. Jaime Lannister in northern hands, a bargaining chip, some suggest, that might be spent to buy other things. Catelyn will not have it. She has her own reasons, buried reasons, reasons she does not lay upon the table. But her argument is clean and hard as flint. Jaime Lannister is leverage. Alive, chained, he binds Tywin's hand. Traded away, He becomes a sword pointed back at them. She insists he remain a prisoner, and she does not yield. And the Tyrells, weighing her resolve against the marriage they came to win, let the matter rest. The Kingslayer stays in his cell. The war keeps its most valuable hostage. And so the pact is drawn. Ink upon parchment, seals pressed into wax. The direwolf and the rose bound in a single line of words. Margaery Tyrell will marry Robb Stark. The Reach will open its granaries. The red wine fleet will sail for the northern cause. Edmure will pay the Frey debt with his marriage, and the crossing will hold, and the balance that has tilted so long toward Casterly Rock will begin, quietly, to shift. Olenna signs last. She sets down the quill and studies the young king across the table, and she is already counting the moves that follow this one, the ones no ink has yet recorded. What if the wedding were held not at the Twins, but at Riverrun? What if the ceremony that in another world became a slaughter took place instead beneath the trout banners of House Tully, in the hall where Hoster Tully once ruled the rivers, with the water running gray and swift outside the walls? Now, if you're enjoying this alternate history of Westeros so far, please consider subscribing, because I upload new stories every single day. Now let's continue with the story. Consider the difference a place can make. The Twins was Frey ground, and a guest upon Frey ground was a guest at Walder Frey's mercy. Riverrun belongs to the Starks and Tullys both, and here the old man comes not as host but as guest, and the distinction turns the whole board. Robb Stark understands this. He has learned, in the year since he took a crown he never wanted, that a slight remembered is a debt that gathers interest, and that Walder Frey keeps the longest ledger in the Riverlands. So he pays it, publicly, deliberately. When the old man arrives, hunched and sour, with his brood of sons and grandsons trailing behind him, like a train of resentments, Robb rises from the high seat to greet him. He does not summon Walder forward. He walks to meet him. He speaks the old man's name loudly enough for the hall to hear, thanks him for the loyalty of his house, names the crossing the hinge upon which the war has turned. Every word is chosen. Every word is armor, for flattery costs nothing, and a proud man starved of respect will forgive much for a public dose of it. Walder is not fooled. Men of his kind are never fooled, but he is appeased, which is a different thing and a more useful one. Edmure has married a Frey daughter, Roslyn, dark-eyed and gentle, a genuine bride rather than an insult dressed as one. The grants are generous, lands, gold, a seat at the councils that matter. The debt is paid in full and paid with grace, and Walder Frey, weighing his grievance against his gains, folds his grievance away. For now, he sits at the feast with his thin lips pressed together, and he watches, and he waits, because waiting is the only weapon left to a man who has already been bought. The Northmen sit hard and plain, in furs and boiled leather, their humor rough as the stone they carve their gods into. The Reach Knights sit perfumed and gilded, their doublets slashed with silk, their courtesies elaborate, and their contempt poorly hidden. Each looks upon the other and sees not an ally but an oddity. And when a red wine knight makes a jest, some remark about northern manners or the absence of them, the Great John rises from the bench like a mountain deciding to fall. The hall goes silent. Hands find the tables where blades are not permitted but fists always are. John Umber is a wall of a man, red-faced, his voice a thing that shakes the rafters, and he demands satisfaction for an insult the Reach Knight scarcely thinks worth the trouble of remembering. Steel is far away. Violence is very close. Robb moves before it breaks. He does not shout. He is learning that a king who shouts has already lost the room. He steps down among them and speaks, low, then rising, turning the quarrel into a toast, twisting the insult into a jest of his own, and setting them both to laughing before either fully understands he has been managed. He praises the Greatjohn's temper as the strength of the North. He praises the Redwyne's wit as the flower of the Reach. He binds the two with a single cup and makes them drink from it. The brawl dies stillborn. Margaery watches all of this. She misses nothing. And when the hall settles back into its uneasy revelry, she leans close to her new husband and says softly that this is the true war, not the one against Tywin, but the one across his own table. Two peoples, one cause, and the mortar between them thinner than either knows. Robb does not disagree. He cannot. He has just watched how easily it cracks. That night, in the tower chamber above the running water, they speak as husband and wife for the first time without an audience. And Margaery, who was raised in a garden where every rose grew from carefully tended intrigue, gives him something more valuable than her body. She gives him her counsel. King's Landing, she says, is not idle. Cersei schemes, Littlefinger whispers, Varys listens, and above them all sits Tywin Lannister, who does not rage and does not rush. Tywin waits. Tywin is patient the way winter is patient, and patience, she warns him, is the deadliest weapon on the board, for it costs the man who wields it nothing but time, and time is the one thing Tywin Lannister believes he owns. The marriage is consummated. The alliance is sealed in more than ink now, and far to the south, in a city of red stone and red intent, the news arrives like a stone dropped into still water. The direwolf has taken the rose, the Reach has turned, and the war Tywin thought half won has, in a single line of parchment, become something else entirely. In the Tower of the Hand, a letter is read, and a hand tightens upon the arm of a chair, and a cold mind begins, very quietly, to count. What does a man like Tywin Lannister do when the ground shifts beneath a war he believed already won? He counts. He does not curse the messenger, nor crumple the parchment, nor summon rage to fill the silence of his solar. He sets the letter flat upon the table, smooths it once with a scarred and deliberate hand, and begins to reckon what has been lost. The Reach was to be the crown's granary and its shield. The Tyrell fleet was to sail beneath golden roses in service of the boy king Joffrey. The wealth of Highgarden was to have flowed north into empty Lannister coffers, and the marriage of Margaery to his grandson was to have bound the second richest house in Westeros to the throne with silk and vows. Now the silk is spent elsewhere. Now the vows are spoken in a northern tongue. The small council convenes beneath a heaviness no candle can lift. Cersei arrives already burning. She speaks of betrayal, of Tyrell treachery, of the insolence of a girl who chose a rebel over a king, and her words climb higher and higher until they crack against the ceiling of the room and fall back down as ash. Tywin lets her finish. He always lets her finish, because a mind spilling itself in fury tells you precisely where it is weakest. When she is done, he says only that anger is a tax the crown can no longer afford to pay, and the room grows colder for it. It is Tyrion who does the arithmetic aloud, and he does it without pleasure. The city has grain for weeks, not months. The gold owed to the Iron Bank compounds like a wound left untreated. Stannis Baratheon sits upon the water with a fleet and an army, and a god that promises him the throne. And the reinforcement they had banked upon, the flower of the Reach with its swords and its ships and its endless golden fields, has ridden north to feed the wolf instead. Tyrion states these things plainly, one after another, the way a physician names the symptoms of a fever he already suspects will kill the patient. He does not offer comfort. There is none to offer. There is only the board as it now stands, and the pieces they still possess, and the distance between the two. And in the corners of the capital, where the great houses see only ruin, one man sees opportunity. Petyr Baelish had built a fortune upon the Tyrell match. He had woven himself into its every thread, the broker, the arranger, the indispensable middleman who would have claimed his fee in influence and titles when the roses came to court. That thread is cut now, but a man who has climbed from nothing does not mourn a lost ladder. He simply finds another wall to scale. Littlefinger reads the same letter Tywin read, and where the hand sees a war grown longer, Baelish sees a vacancy, a role no longer occupied, a favor no longer owed, a crown suddenly desperate for allies it had believed it did not need. So he comes to the Lannisters, soft-footed and smiling, bearing not roses but eagles. The Vale, he murmurs, sits untouched by the war, its nights fresh, its passes unbreached, its lady lonely and pliable and fond of him beyond all reason. Lysa Arryn would open the mountains for the right voice, speaking the right words, and Petyr Baelish possesses both. He does not ask for much, only Harrenhal, only a lordship, only the small and necessary elevation of a man who has always been just beneath the notice of his betters. Tywin listens. Tywin weighs. A man who would sell one alliance to broker another is a man who will one day sell you too. And Tywin knows this the way he knows his own name. But drowning men do not inspect the rope. They seize it. And so the door is left open, the offer left standing, the eagle circling patiently above the burning lion. Across the black water, another mind is counting, and it counts faster. Stannis Baratheon receives the news in his tent, and it reaches him like a gift from the Lord of Light himself. The Tyrells have gone north. The capital stands alone. Whatever host was meant to break upon his flank has ridden 1,000 leagues away, and the city that guards the Iron Throne is defended now by a boy king, a raging queen, a dwarf's improvisations, and gold that runs thinner by the day. Stannis is not a man given to hope, but he is a man given to logic, and logic tells him the same thing it told Tyrion in that cold council chamber. The walls of King's Landing have never been thinner than they are tonight. The moment has never been riper. To wait now is to squander the single advantage a god has laid upon his table. He gives the order. Down in the harbor the great ships stir, their sails filling with a wind that carries the smell of the sea and the promise of fire, oars biting into black tide, prows turning toward the mouth of the Blackwater. In the capital the bells have not yet begun to ring. The watchmen upon the walls see only darkness where the water meets the sky. But the darkness is moving now. The darkness is coming closer, and no rose will arrive in time to stop it. Consider how a single hour of green flame can decide the fate of a war, and how the absence of a single army can decide the fate of that hour. The bells begin at last, too late to matter and too early to change anything, and the men upon the walls of King's Landing watch the black water fill with sails. Tyrion Lannister has prepared for this. He has spent the days before this night doing the only thing a man in his position can do, which is to convert his own cleverness into weapons. And the weapon he has chosen is the alchemist's fire, the substance the fools of the guild call the wisdom of ages, and the great chain he has strung across the mouth of the river to trap Stannis's fleet within a killing ground of his own making. The trap works. That much history would record either way. The single ship laden with wildfire drifts into the massed hulls of the Baratheon armada, and a lone archer's flaming arrow finds it, and the river becomes a thing that no sane man should ever have to witness. Green flame climbs the masts and swallows the water itself, for wildfire burns upon water as readily as upon wood, and hundreds of men die in a single indrawn breath, cooked in their armor, drowned as they leap into a sea that has become a furnace. It is a catastrophe unlike any the war has yet produced, and here is where the two histories diverge. Quietly, without fanfare, in the space of what does not happen next. In the war that was, this was the beginning of the end. The wildfire broke Stannis's fleet, and while his men still reeled from the horror of it, a golden host descended upon their rear, Tywin Lannister and Mace Tyrell riding side by side beneath the banners of a new alliance, and the Baratheon army was crushed between anvil and hammer. But there is no Tyrell host on this road. The Roses ride the other way, bound to Winterfell by a marriage vow, and so the hammer never falls. The wildfire kills, it maims, it sows terror across the water, but it does not win the battle, because winning the battle required a second blow that no longer exists. Stannis is not a man who breaks because his ships have burned. He has crossed a river of fire to reach these walls, and he does not intend to turn back for a river of anything. His men ford the shallows where the flames have guttered. They drag their siege ladders through the shallows and the smoke, and they gain the walls. Real fighting now, the kind that has no elegance to it, men hacking at men in the dark upon the ramparts, the mudgate straining under the weight of a battering ram, the defenders too few and too frightened. Tyrion rides out with a pitiful column of gold cloaks and Lannister men-at-arms, because someone must, because the alternative is to stand in the Red Keep and wait to be dragged from it. He fights, he bleeds, he holds a fragment of the gate that by every calculation should have fallen. And within the keep, Cersei Lannister does the arithmetic of the desperate. She has been told the city is lost. She believes it. She has a vial in her possession, a mercy she intends to grant her son before Stannis's men can grant him something worse, and she draws Tommen onto her lap and lifts the boy's chin and reaches for the poison that will make an ending of him. The moment hangs. It is the closest a Lannister child has ever come to death at a Lannister hand. And then the sounds outside the walls change. The screaming shifts key. The tide, which had been flowing one way, hesitates. Tyrion's cavaliers and the raw courage of men with nowhere left to run have done just enough, not to win, never to win, but to hold. Stannis, bleeding from a battle that has cost him his fleet and gained him nothing decisive, does the same cold arithmetic Cersei has done and arrives at the opposite conclusion. He cannot take the city tonight. He cannot afford to burn what remains of his strength against walls he can no longer surround. He withdraws to his ships, to the ones that still float, and turns his prows toward Dragonstone, wounded, diminished, alive. It is not a Lannister triumph. It is a stalemate written in ash and drowned men, and a capital that has been gutted from within. When Tywin Lannister arrives at last, he does not ride into the city of the histories he might have imagined. A grateful capital, garlanded with roses and secured by a new great alliance. He rides into a smoking wound of a city, its stores burned, its people starving, its coffers echoing, held together by nothing but the exhaustion of everyone left to hold it. He climbs to the solar that his son has bled to keep, and he stands at the window looking out over the ruined harbor, and he understands something he has not permitted himself to understand until this moment. The problem is not Robb Stark. The problem was never Robb Stark alone. The wolf has grown a rose upon his flank, and to break the one, he must first find a way to break the two apart. He turns from the window. He begins to think, what if the strongest chains a king can forge are not made of steel at all, but of bread? What if a granary can hold a realm together more surely than a garrison ever could? Robb Stark, ruling from the ancient stones of Riverrun, has begun to understand this in a way that his father never lived long enough to teach him. The war is no longer only a matter of armies. It is a matter of who eats and who starves. And in the Riverlands, where the fields have been trampled and burned by Lannister raiders for 2 long years, the answer to that question decides everything. The grain comes north from the Reach in wagons and on barges, endless columns of it, wheat and barley and dried fruit and salted stores that Margaery's grandmother marshaled through the passes and along the river roads with the patience of a woman who has spent a lifetime moving pieces no one else could see. And it does not simply feed the soldiers. Robb, at his wife's quiet suggestion, orders it distributed to the small folk as well, to the burned villages and the widowed farms, to the lords who had wavered, and the lords who had knelt to Tywin out of terror rather than love. A hungry man remembers who fed him. A frightened lord remembers who did not sack his holdfast. This is the calculation, and it is Margaery's calculation as much as Robb's, spoken over shared maps in the long evenings, the two of them bent close over the same candle. She does the work the sword cannot. Where northern banners once meant only occupation to the river lords, meant strange men with strange gods and grim faces, Margaery Tyrell arrives with warmth and wit and an inexhaustible interest in the names of everyone's children. She dines with the daughters of houses that had thought to betray them. She listens, she remembers, and slowly, house by house, the fear that Tywin had counted upon begins to dissolve into something dangerous to him, something like belief. The Northmen are no longer conquerors. They are the men who came with the roses and the grain. Robb has learned the other lesson too, the harder one, the one written in the ghost of a defeat that never came. He does not overextend. He does not scatter his strength across 100 miles of enemy country, chasing glory that will curdle the moment his back is turned. He keeps his host consolidated along the Riverlands and the Westerlands border, a coiled thing rather than a scattered one. And when he sends Roose Bolton eastward with a detachment, he does not send him unwatched. Catelyn had said it first, in the low, careful voice she uses for the things she is most certain of. Margaery had said it after, in fewer words. The Lord of the Dreadfort has eyes that do not warm when he smiles. He gives too little and offers too much, and so Bolton rides with orders that leave him no room for independent glory, shadowed by men loyal to the Tullys, his correspondence quietly noted, his movements bounded. A king who trusts too easily does not remain a king. Robb has decided that he would rather be thought suspicious than be proven a fool. And upon the southern seas the noose draws tighter. The red wine fleet, that great engine of the arbor that came to Robb's cause, bound in Tyrell gold, has begun its patient strangling work. Lannister cogs are taken or sunk. Merchant vessels that once fed Lannisport's coffers now find the sea roads closed to them, and the wealth that made House Lannister the terror of the realm begins, drop by drop, to bleed away into salt water. Gold does not fight when there is nothing left to buy. Tywin knows this arithmetic better than any man alive, for he built his house upon it, and he can feel it turning against him now like a tide. So he does what a man of his mind must do. He does not send another army into the teeth of a stalemate he cannot afford. He sends words instead. Emissaries slip north with soft voices and careful gifts, and their errand is not conquest but division. They speak to northern lords of how the Reach grows fat upon this war, while the north bleeds for it. They murmur to Reach interests of how their queen has bound her house to a doomed venture in a frozen country that will never repay the debt. They ask, gently, whether a king in the north truly needs a southern wife whispering in his ear. They ask, gently, whether the Tyrells serve the wolf or use him. The seeds are small. Tywin has never needed large seeds. He has only ever needed patient soil and time. In her solar, Margaery reads a letter that was never meant for her eyes, intercepted upon the road, and she reads it a second time, slowly, the way one studies a wound to learn how deep it goes. Then she folds it, and she does not raise her voice, and she does not send for her husband in alarm. She sends for her grandmother, because the poison has entered the court, and she means to know its shape before Robb does. She sets the letter down upon the table between them, and she says only one thing. He has stopped trying to beat us. He has started trying to unmake us. The old woman looks at the parchment, and she does not disagree. What if the most dangerous weapon in a war is not the sword, but the doubt? What if a single rumor, planted in the right ear at the right hour, can accomplish what 10,000 men could not? Tywin Lannister understands this. He has always understood this. And so the whispers move through the northern camp like smoke through a keep, seeping under tent flaps and into the hearts of men who have never once questioned their king until now. They say the Tyrells are playing a longer game. They say Margaery smiles at the wolf, but dreams of a crown that sits upon her own brow. They say the Reach does not spend its gold and its grain on frozen country without expecting to own that country in the end. Catelyn Stark hears these things and does not dismiss them, because a mother who has buried a husband to southern treachery has earned her suspicion, and the great Jon, who trusts steel and blood and little else, mutters into his cups that a king in the north has no business bedding a rose. The seeds have found their soil. This is precisely what Tywin intended. Margaery does not wait. She has learned the shape of the poison, and she knows that poison left to spread will eventually reach the man she has married. So she does not defend herself with words. Words are cheap in a war of whispers, and everyone possesses them. Instead, she offers proof. She has spent weeks watching the camp the way a hawk watches a field, noting which men speak too freely and which men listen too carefully, tracing coin to hands and hands to mouths. And when she brings the matter before Robb and his lords, she does not plead. She produces the informant, a quartermaster's clerk, a man of no consequence, who has been feeding the movements of the northern host to a rider who meets him at the tree line each third night. Tywin's man, bought and paid, and now exposed, before the very lords he was meant to turn against her. The silence in the tent is a kind of verdict. The Greatjon says nothing, Catelyn says nothing, and Robb looks at his wife with something that is no longer suspicion and understands what she has done. She has not merely proven her loyalty, she has demonstrated her use. There is a difference, and it matters, and everyone in that tent grasps it at once. But triumph in one theater does not shield a man from disaster in another. A raven comes north from the coast, and it carries the worst news a man can receive. Balon Greyjoy has declared himself a king. The Ironborn have poured out of their longships onto the shores of the north, and while Robb Stark marched south with his strength, he left his home undefended. Winterfell has fallen, and it has fallen not to a siege, not to a storm of steel, but to the boy he loved as a brother. Theon Greyjoy has taken the castle from within. The report goes further. It says that Bran and Rickon Stark are dead, 2 boys, the last of the pack left behind the walls, and the walls betrayed them. Robb does not scream. He does not weep, not where his lords can see. He simply sets the letter down and stares at the fire, and for a long moment, the king in the north is only a young man who has lost his brothers and his home in the space of a single breath. Then the calculations begin, because they must. What if he turns the whole host north and abandons everything he has won in the south? What if he presses his advantage against the Lannisters and lets his homeland burn behind him? Every choice is a wound. There is no path that does not bleed. It is Margaery who steps into the silence, and she does not offer comfort, because comfort will not retake a coast. She offers strategy. To march the army north, she says, is to surrender all they have bled for in the south. The Ironborn came by sea, and by sea they must be answered. She reminds him, quietly, that House Tyrell commands ships, that the Red Wine Fleet is not a small thing, that a squadron sent to harry the Ironborn shores and strangle their supply lines will accomplish what no exhausted infantry column can. Patience, she counsels, patience and the sea. Robb listens, and then he acts. He sends word to the Umbers and the Karstarks, to every northern house not marching under his banner, to rise and raise the north against the invaders. Let the Ironborn learn that a kraken on land is far from home. He will hold the south with steel and reclaim the coast with sails, and he will trust his wife's counsel because she has earned that trust twice over now, once in exposing the traitor and once in offering him a way forward when he could see only grief. The marriage, which the whispers sought to shatter, does not shatter. It hardens. Shared catastrophe has a way of fusing what mere alliance could not. In the quiet, after the ravens have flown, Robb looks at Margaery, and he sees not a southern rose sent to trap him, but a partner who did not flinch. And somewhere far to the south, in a warm solar in King's Landing, Tywin Lannister receives word that his informant is dead, and his whispers have failed, and he begins, patiently, to plan another way. What if the sea, and not the sword, decides the fate of the North? What if the answer to a kraken on land is not to meet it on that land at all, but to sever the water that carries it home? This is the calculation Robb Stark makes, and it is a good one. The Ironborn are raiders by blood and by breeding. They strike from the water and they retreat to the water, and their entire strength rests upon the assumption that no enemy can match them upon it. Take that assumption away, and they are no longer krakens. They are men, landlocked, outnumbered, far from the cold gray home that made them, sitting in a captured castle, with the sea at their backs turned suddenly hostile. The Tyrell fleet is the finest in Westeros. The red wine ships alone outnumber anything Balon Greyjoy can put to water, and when they join with what northern hulls remain along the western coast, the equation is no longer close. It is settled. The only question is time. And so the combined expedition sails. Northern crews who know the shoals, and Tyrell captains who know how to fight upon them. And between them, they do in weeks what a marching host could not have done in a season. They retake the western shore town by town, harbor by harbor. They burn iron-borne longships where they sit at anchor. And most importantly, they close the water around Winterfell like a hand closing around a throat. Theon Greyjoy holds an ancient castle he cannot supply, cannot reinforce, and cannot escape. His men look to the horizon for the sails that will save them, and the sails that come are not their own. The garrison does not last. It cannot. Cut off from the sea, cut off from pike, cut off from every source of the strength that made them dangerous, the iron-borne hold collapses under its own hollow weight. Winterfell burns. That much cannot be undone. The ancient stones stand blackened, and the great hall where Ned Stark once sat in judgment is gutted by fire. And Robb receives this news with the flat grief of a man who has already lost so much that one more wound simply joins the others. But then comes the second raven, and the second raven changes everything. Bran and Rickon may yet live. The bodies displayed upon the walls were not theirs. In the chaos of the fall, the youngest Starks fled, hidden and guided by companions loyal to their blood, vanished into the wilds beyond the smoking castle. Robb reads this and reads it again, and for the first time in a long season, something loosens in his chest. His brothers may live. His house is not extinguished. The North he fights for still has heirs. There is another fire he must tend, and this one burns quieter, but no less dangerous. Lord Rickard Karstark comes to him with grievance in his throat and grief in his eyes, for the Karstarks have lost sons in this war, and grief of that kind seeks a target. In another telling of this tale, that grief would find one. Karstark would slaughter captives in a fit of vengeance, and Robb would be forced to answer murder with the headsman's axe, and in doing so, would shatter his own host, sending the Karstark spears marching home in fury and gutting his strength at the worst possible moment. But that telling required captives to murder. It required a Robb distracted, weakened, bleeding men and momentum. This Robb has neither problem. Jaime Lannister sits secure and well-guarded, never exposed to Karstark bloodlust, never within reach of vengeful hands. There are no high-born captives left carelessly vulnerable. And so when Lord Rickard comes with his grief, Robb meets it not with tragedy, but with justice, firm, cold, measured. He hears the man's grievances. He honors the Karstark dead. He offers what a king can offer, and he denies what a king must deny, and he does it from a position of strength rather than desperation. The crisis passes. It does not fracture his host. Half his army does not march away in the night. The Karstark spears remain, and Robb's strength remains whole, and the difference between this outcome and the other is measured in the lives of 10,000 men who will not now die because a king lost his temper and his prisoner in the same season. With the north stabilizing and the Ironborn broken upon the water, Robb turns south. And he turns south stronger than he has ever been. His western coast reclaimed, his brothers perhaps alive, his host intact, his marriage hardened into partnership, his wife's family fleet proven decisive in the field. And then the sea offers one final gift. Balon Greyjoy dies. Whether by storm or by darker means, the old kraken falls from his bridge into the churning water below, and the Iron Islands, already reeling from the destruction of half their fleet, descend into a succession struggle that consumes what strength remains to them. Uncle against nephew, brother against brother, the drowned gods' people tearing at one another while their enemies consolidate. The Ironborn threat does not merely retreat, it devours itself, and Robb Stark, king in the north and increasingly something more, is free at last to look only in one direction: south. What if the most dangerous man in Westeros were forced, for the first time in his long life, to fight a battle he did not choose? Consider Tywin Lannister in his solar at Harrenhal, and understand what has happened to him. He is not beaten, not yet, but he is bleeding in the one place a Lannister can never afford to bleed. The gold is thinning, the Reach fleet chokes his ports, and the Tyrell blockade means that no grain moves, no coin moves, no supply moves that Highgarden does not permit, and Highgarden permits nothing. The Iron Bank, which lends to winners, has begun to ask uncomfortable questions, and a Lannister without gold is simply a man with a lion on his coat. So the old lion does what old lions do when cornered. He gathers his host and marches west to defend his own lands, to relieve the pressure on the Rock, to draw Robb Stark into open field where Lannister numbers and Lannister discipline might yet decide the war in a single afternoon. It is the correct decision. It is also exactly what Robb wants. Because here is the thing that Tywin, for all his brilliance, has never fully reckoned with. He has never fought the young wolf on ground of the wolf's choosing, and the wolf chooses his ground the way a chess master chooses his opening, not for the move itself, but for the 12 moves that follow. Near the Golden Tooth, where the mountain road narrows and the passes constrict a great army into a thin and vulnerable column, Robb lays his trap. He does not offer battle in the open. He offers the appearance of retreat, the scent of an army caught out of position, a lure dangled precisely where Tywin's need for a decisive engagement will override Tywin's famous caution. And Tywin, who cannot afford to wait, who must win now or lose slowly, takes the bait he knows may be bait, because the alternative is to march home and die by degrees. He tightens his grip on the reins. He gives the order. The trap closes. What Margaery has been building for a year springs shut in that same moment, though she is 100 leagues away. The minor houses of the Westerlands, the ones she has been courting through letters and marriages and quiet promises, the ones who have watched Lannister fortunes wane and Tyrell wealth wax, do not rise for their liege lord. Some declare openly for the king in the north. More simply stand aside, holding their spears, watching the great houses bleed. And a lord who counts on 10,000 men and finds he commands 7 has already lost a battle he has not yet begun to fight. Then the ground itself betrays the lion. The narrow passes deny the Lannister host room to maneuver, room to deploy, room to bring their numbers to bear, and while the northern infantry holds the line in the defile, Garland Tyrell brings the heavy horse of the Reach down upon the Lannister flank where the terrain has funneled them into a killing ground. The Gallant, they will call him after this. The charge does not push the Lannister line, it shatters it. It folds one wing into the other, collapses order into chaos, turns a disciplined army into a fleeing mob in the space of a single sustained thunder of hooves. Tywin Lannister does not break. Understand that. He never breaks. But he sees, with that same terrible clarity, the exact instant the battle is lost, and he does the only thing left to a man who has lost everything except his life. He turns his horse. He rides for the capital with the remnants of his guard, leaving the Westerlands open behind him, leaving Casterly Rock exposed, leaving the road to King's Landing undefended. The old lion escapes, but he escapes as a fugitive from his own defeat, and both of them know it. And now Robb Stark stands at the crossroads of the entire war, holding a victory so complete that it poses a question more dangerous than any battle. He convenes his lords, and in the debate that follows, 3 futures contend. The first, to march west, take Casterly Rock, gut the Lannister power at its root, and crown himself king in the north, and the Trident forever, a kingdom carved permanent from the wreckage. The second, to treat with Stannis Baratheon, whose claim by blood is arguably the true one, and to trade recognition for alliance against the Lannisters both hate. The third, the boldest and the bloodiest, to march on King's Landing itself, to end not merely the Lannister army but the Lannister dynasty, to pull down the false King Joffrey and everything his mother built. Each path leads somewhere. Each path forecloses the others. And the young man who set out to avenge a father now holds in his hands the power to reshape the entire realm, if only he can decide what he wishes to become. He does not answer that night. He does not need to answer yet. But the answer is coming, and the whole of Westeros will turn upon it. What if the most dangerous man in a war is not the one with the largest army, but the one who has been made desperate? Stannis Baratheon has been made desperate. His host broke upon the walls of King's Landing, his ambition drowned in the black water of the Blackwater, and he retreated to Dragonstone, a lord of ash and stone. And yet he did not surrender. He does not know how. A man like Stannis does not bend toward defeat. He calcifies around it, growing harder in the losing, more certain of the rightness that the world keeps refusing to grant him. And so, from that lonely island fortress, he sends a rider north. The envoy arrives at Riverrun in the gray light of a winter morning, and the letter he carries is a proposition dressed as a demand. Stannis proposes alliance. The two of them together against the Lannisters both despise. Combine the wolf and the stag, and Tywin's exhausted lions cannot hold. The terms are these. Robb recognizes Stannis as the one true king of the 7 kingdoms south of the Neck. In exchange, Stannis will grant the North its independence, its ancient crown, its severance from the Iron Throne. It seems, on the surface, a fair exchange. It is not, because a promise from Stannis Baratheon is a promise carved in law, and the law is a rigid thing. And rigid things break the fingers of those who lean upon them. In the solar of Riverrun, 3 minds turn the proposal over. Catelyn sees the danger first, as mothers of hostages tend to. Stannis is righteous. Stannis is unyielding. Stannis is a man who would burn the realm to a cinder rather than allow one wrong to stand uncorrected. To bind the North to such a man is to yoke a wolf to a wildfire, and yet to refuse him is to face Tywin alone, and Tywin does not lose the long game, only the short ones. Robb weighs the crown he wears against the crown Stannis demands he acknowledge. He is king in the north and of the Trident. To recognize Stannis as king of everything else is to concede that his own kingship is a thing granted rather than seized, a courtesy rather than a right. Kings do not survive on courtesies. He knows this. He has learned it in the harshest schoolroom in the world. And then Margaery speaks. She has been silent, as she often is when the men are still discovering what she already understands. She does not argue against alliance. She argues against the shape of it. Why, she asks, should the North purchase Stannis's recognition with recognition of its own? Why should Robb hand him a crown when what Stannis truly needs is not a title but a sword? Let Stannis and the Lannisters bleed each other in the south. Let the stag and the lion lock horns until both are gored. The North need only ensure that neither wins so cleanly that it can turn north afterward. Independence secured. The Reach delivered into Tyrell hands as the reward for switching sides. And the two great powers of the South reduced, together, to something manageable. It is not victory through battle. It is victory through arithmetic. Into this calculation walks Olenna Tyrell, arrived from Highgarden with the particular slowness of a woman who has never in her life needed to hurry to be heard. She listens. She smiles the smile of someone who has watched 3 generations of clever men mistake ambition for strategy, and then she agrees with her granddaughter, in words sharper than any blade in the room. War on all fronts is the pastime of fools and boys, she says. The wise choose their enemies one at a time, and they let their enemies choose each other. Bend to Stannis on paper, and you have made yourself his subject. Fight beside him without bending, and you have made yourself indispensable. The difference is everything. Robb sits with this. The room narrows to the space inside his own skull, where the pieces arrange and rearrange. He will not surrender his crown. That is fixed, the one immovable stone at the center of his reasoning. But he does not need to surrender it to make use of Stannis. He can offer alliance without recognition, a partnership of convenience. 2 kings, each refusing to acknowledge the other's title, marching against the one enemy that makes their quarrel over titles irrelevant. It is untidy. It is unresolved. It leaves a question dangling that will have to be answered later, in blood or in ink. But it does not foreclose his future, and that, in this moment, is worth more than tidiness. So the answer goes south. Robb Stark offers Stannis Baratheon his strength against Tywin Lannister and asks nothing but the same in return. He will keep his crown. He will not name Stannis king. And Stannis, on his island of ash, reads the reply with the particular fury of a man who wanted obedience and has been offered mere usefulness instead. He grinds his teeth. He considers refusal, and then he does the arithmetic he cannot escape. He needs the North far more than the North needs him. He accepts. The wolf and the stag do not love one another, but they now march in the same direction, and in King's Landing, where Tywin Lannister has counted his enemies carefully and thought them divided, a raven arrives, bearing news that they are no longer. The pressure begins to close, from the north and from the sea, and it is only beginning. What if the most dangerous thing a great house can face is not defeat but arithmetic, not the sword at the gate, but the ledger that no longer balances? Tywin Lannister has spent his life understanding that power is not magic, that it is not divine right, that it is bought and paid for in gold and fear and the careful cultivation of debts. And now the ledger has turned against him. The gold is spent. The debts are called. The fear has evaporated in the space between two enemies who have stopped fighting each other. He knows this. He is not a man who deceives himself. That is the first thing to understand about Tywin Lannister in his final days, that he sees his position with perfect clarity and refuses to bend to it anyway. While Stannis closed the Blackwater and Robb marched from the west, the true architect of the campaign remained far from the walls. Margaery's alliance had done what no battlefield victory alone could accomplish. Reach grain had sustained Robb's armies through a long campaign. Reach gold had financed the war. Reach cavalry had shattered Tywin's field army. Even now, Reach lords secured the roads south of the capital, ensuring no relief force could gather. The siege unfolding before King's Landing was not simply Robb Stark's victory. It was the inevitable result of the marriage that had united the Wolf and the Rose. For Tommen, for Myrcella, for the innocent pieces on the board who did not choose this game and do not deserve to burn for it. He opens a gate. Consider the weight of that act. A single gate, unbarred in the night, and the calculus of the entire siege shifts. A city that might have burned to ash, that might have been taken street by bloody street with thousands dead in the taking. That city instead falls with a kind of terrible efficiency. Tyrion has weighed the ash against the shame and chosen the shame. He has decided that a living Lannister is worth more than a proud one. His father would call it treason. His father would be right. And Tyrion opens the gate anyway. Joffrey does not understand any of it. That is his tragedy. Such as it is, he dies as he lived, screaming for a crown that has already slipped through his fingers, defending a throne that no longer means anything, killed in the confusion of a fight he never truly comprehended. There is no dignity in it. There is no meaning in it. There is only a cruel boy meeting a cruel end in a war his cruelty helped to start. But Tywin is another matter entirely. They come to him with offers. Surrender and keep your life. Surrender and keep some fraction of your dignity, some corner of your legacy. Bend and be spared. And Tywin Lannister, who has bent men and cities and kingdoms to his will for 40 years, looks at every offer and refuses it. He will not kneel. He has never knelt. He would rather die as the Lion of Casterly Rock than live as a defeated old man, dependent on the mercy of a boy king from the north. So he leads the last defense of the Red Keep himself, sword in hand, though he is no great swordsman, surrounded by the last men loyal enough or trapped enough to stand with him. And he falls there, not by accident, not by some cruel twist of fate or poisoned cup or hunting mishap. He falls in battle, leading the final stand of his house, ending the dominance of House Lannister the way he would have wanted it ended if he had to end at all, on his feet, with his enemies before him, unbowed. And when the smoke clears, the shape of the realm has changed forever. The Iron Throne changes hands. Stannis Baratheon claims it, cold and rigid, and finally seated where he believes he has always belonged. But the throne he claims rules a fractured thing. The Lannisters are broken, stripped of the dominance that Casterly Rock once projected across the Seven Kingdoms, reduced from architects of the realm to a defeated house clinging to survival. And in the north and the Riverlands, Robb Stark stands unassailable. He has not taken the Iron Throne. He never wanted it, but he has done something that may prove more durable than any throne. He has won, and the question of what a victorious king does with his victory now begins to rise. What does a victorious king do with his victory when the crown he refused sits on another man's brow? He builds, not a throne, a border, a recognition, a settlement written not in ambition, but in ink and blood already spent. And this is the harder work, the slower work, the work that will outlast every battle he ever fought. Because to the north, sealed by the strength of arms rather than the softness of claim, sits another king. Robb Stark is recognized as king in the north and the Trident, not by petition, not by Stannis's gracious permission, by the plain arithmetic of the field, where the north remains unconquered, and the riverlands remain his, and no army in the realm exists that could take them back without bleeding itself white in the attempt. Stannis knows this. Stannis, whatever else he is not a man who deceives himself about arithmetic. He signs what he must sign. He acknowledges what he cannot unmake. An independent realm, bounded at the neck, ruled by a wolf who never wanted the Iron Throne, and therefore could not be tempted away from the only thing he did want, which was home. And while the kings settle the matter of the north, Margaery Tyrell settles the matter of the south, and she does it so quietly that half the men in the hall do not notice it happening until it is already done. This is her gift. She does not demand. She arranges. She lets each lord believe he has secured his own advantage, and only later, when the pieces have been counted, does the shape of her design become visible. The Reach secures its autonomy, not independence, nothing so provocative, nothing that would force Stannis to fight, but autonomy, the freedom to govern its own harvests and its own bannermen without a boot from King's Landing pressing down. And around this autonomy, she weaves marriage ties, thread by careful thread, binding the great southern houses to House Tyrell until they form a block too strong, too interlocked, too mutually dependent for any king to bully one without provoking all. Consider what this accomplishes. Stannis wears the crown. Stannis sits the throne. But south of the neck, the true power flows through Highgarden, through the granaries that feed the realm, through the alliances that Margaery has stitched so cleanly that they look like nothing more than good breeding and prudent matches. She has made her house the fulcrum on which the southern kingdoms balance, and she has done it as a queen consort in the north, married to a rival king, negotiating for her father's realm from a position that ought to have been impossible. She has served two masters and betrayed neither. She has served, in truth, only one interest, her own, and that interest now spans the width of the continent. But the settlement is not only maps and marriages, it is also, at last, a homecoming, for buried within the terms, unglamorous, easily overlooked amid the grand redrawing of borders, is a single provision that matters more to Robb Stark than any crown ever could. Sansa, his sister, held in King's Landing through all the long years of the war, a hostage, a pawn, a girl whose survival depended on the whims of men who wished her family dead. And now, in the settlement, she is recovered, returned, delivered north to the family that had begun to fear she was lost forever. She is not the only one. Bran and Rickon, thought dead, mourned as dead, their names carved into the grief of Winterfell, are found, safe, alive. The younger wolves, scattered by the war's cruelty, drawn back at last toward the den. Consider what this means to a house that had been reduced, in the darkest hour, to a single son fighting a war he could not abandon. believing his brothers murdered and his sisters lost. Consider the weight lifted, the wound closed, the dire wolf's house, which had been so nearly extinguished, restored to something whole. There is a scene here that no chronicle records fully, because some moments resist the cold precision of history. Robb Stark, king in the north, victor of a war that redrew the map of a continent, meets his brothers and his sister after years of separation. He does not speak of borders. He does not speak of thrones. He is simply a brother, and for one moment, the strategist gives way to the boy who left home believing his father would return. But the moment cannot hold. It never can, not for a king, because a realm now exists that did not exist before, a fragile, unprecedented thing, and it must be governed. The war is won, the map is drawn, and the far harder question, whether a kingdom built on victory can survive the peace that follows, now begins to press against the walls of everything he has built. Consider what it means to rebuild a thing that was broken, not by accident, but by design. Winterfell had burned. Its towers had been thrown down, its godswood fouled, its ancient stones scorched by men who understood that the surest way to break a house is to break its home. And yet stone remembers. The foundations laid by the first men had endured 8,000 years of winter, and they endured this too, waiting beneath the ash for hands willing to raise them again. Those hands came. They came in the thousands, northern laborers who knew the old ways of fitting granite to granite, masons and carpenters and diggers who had followed the young wolf to war and now followed him home, and the coin that fed them, that bought the timber and the iron and the bread that kept them working through the shortening days, came south along the King's Road from the Reach. Winterfell rose again through the combined strength of two kingdoms. Northern craftsmen rebuilt its ancient walls while Reach coin and supplies ensured the work never stopped. Every stone laid became another reminder that this marriage had built something stronger than either kingdom could have achieved alone. Margaery understood this instinctively. Robb increasingly relied upon her, not merely as his queen, but as the first counselor whose judgment he trusted above every other voice at court. She had been raised to it, groomed from childhood to move through halls and make allies of strangers, and she brought that talent north and turned it upon a court that had never seen its like. She did not try to make the North into the Reach. That would have been a fool's error, and she was no fool. Instead, she learned it. She learned the names of the mountain clans, and the grievances of the river lords, and the quiet pride of the men who held the coldest holdfasts along the coast. She listened, and in listening she became, over the slow accumulation of seasons, not a foreign queen imposed upon a wary people, but a queen the North had chosen to keep. That is the harder victory. Anyone can win a throne. Holding the hearts beneath it is the work of a lifetime. The air came in the depth of an autumn that already carried winter's breath. A sun, in whom the blood of wolf and rose ran together for the first time, and in that small, squalling life, the entire architecture of the alliance found its permanence. A treaty can be broken, a marriage can be annulled, but a child is neither. A child is the future made flesh, the guarantee that binds two houses beyond the lives of the people who first joined them. Robb held his son and understood, perhaps more clearly than he had understood anything in the war, that everything he had fought for now had a name and a face and a heartbeat. And here is the thing that surprised even him. The marriage that had begun as cold arithmetic, as a calculation weighed against the memory of another path, a path that led to a hall in the Riverlands, to music that turned to slaughter, to a red wedding that in this telling never came to pass, had become something the arithmetic could not have predicted. Affection, then trust, then the particular, formidable partnership of two people who have learned to think as one across a table, to finish each other's arguments, to govern in tandem. They were not the same. He was direct where she was subtle, blunt where she was gracious. But the differences fit. They interlocked like granite fitted to granite, and what they built between them was stronger than either could have raised alone. Catelyn lived to see it. That too matters. The woman who had lost a husband and believed for a time she had lost her children, who had walked to the edge of grief and looked into it, lived instead to hold grandchildren in the rebuilt halls of her son's castle, to see the honor of her family not merely restored, but exceeded. The Starks had come through the fire, and they had come through whole. Then the snows began to fall in earnest, and the ravens came with them, word from the wall, of things stirring in the frozen dark beyond it, of a cold that was not merely weather. In the south, they dismissed such tales, distracted by their fractured squabbles, their exhausted treasuries, their thrones contested by the wreckage of houses that had spent themselves. But the north did not dismiss them. The north had granaries full of reach grain, and allies to the south, and a king who had learned to prepare for the enemy others refused to see. Robb Stark stood upon the walls his people had raised again, and looked toward the true winter, and he was ready, in ways the shattered realm below could never be. The single choice to marry a rose instead of walking into slaughter had changed everything, and the direwolf's line, so nearly ended, endured at last into the long dark, and beyond it, into whatever dawn might come. And this brings us to the end of this alternate history. If you enjoyed exploring how events might have unfolded differently, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. We dive into new stories from the world of Westeros every single day, imagining the choices, battles, alliances, and destinies that could have completely changed the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. What do you think would have happened next? Did this version of history end better than the original? Or would you have taken the story in a completely different direction? Leave your ideas in the comments, because many of the best future stories come directly from your suggestions. Thank you so much for watching and for spending your time with me. I'll see you tomorrow with another alternate history from Westeros. Until then, peace out.